My name is Kathleen Terner, and I've been a Christian for over 40 years. I'm a mother of 3 and a high school math teacher who also tutors in the evenings to support my motorcycling adventuring. I don't think I ever would have envisioned myself being a worldwide motorcycle adventurer when I started setting out on my first cross-country journey. And as of this point, I've ridden solo through 4 different continents. I essentially ride on my own, just me and the motorcycle and God. I feel like God is always with me, literally, and that has been so incredibly freeing for someone who is so terrified of being alone. When we have the courage to step out in faith and take that step, whatever it might be, we find that what we see on the other side is so much more than we could have anticipated. I have felt this sense of calling for several years now, that I have an important message to share.
I have to tell you guys that it is almost surreal to me to be standing here sharing with you about my adventures on a motorcycle by myself in Africa. Because it was just a few years ago in 2020 that I was too afraid to ride up my own driveway. I was also so mired in feelings of shame and worthlessness at the time. And I just felt like there was no hope. As I mentioned before, I just felt like I had made too many mistakes for God to ever use me for good again. But what I couldn't see then, and I can see now, is there is no such thing as a mistake too big for God not to redeem. Yeah. His grace is so much more bountiful than I realized, and His love and provision for us does not depend on our performance. He has a future and a hope for us. And the irony is that as I've been willing to step out in faith and move forward rather than getting stuck into my fear, He has given me more courage, more hope, more joy, and more confidence than I ever thought possible. As He's helped me to overcome one obstacle after another, He's also shown me that there are going to be times when I am not meant to overcome an obstacle, but that He will be there with me anyway.
I had limited my view of God's grace. What I didn't understand is that God's grace is infinite and unconditional. It's not something I need to earn.
Where I had been so fixated on all of my mistakes and failures, God had been looking at the lessons that I had learned from those trials and tribulations. Where I had been so lost in the depths of my feelings of shame and worthlessness, He was looking at me as the daughter whom He deeply loved. And when I felt those depths of feelings of despair and hopelessness, He knew that He had a future and a hope for me.
I think if things hadn't been as bad as they were, I wouldn't have been so motivated to give up complete control of my life. I had to basically say to God, okay, Lord, what I'm doing isn't working. I want to give all of my life over to You.
At that time, I was going through a really low point in my life. I was battling throat cancer. The chemo and radiation treatments caused the hair on the back of my head to fall out, and I actually lost the ability to eat or speak for several weeks.
I have this real sense of freedom, and that's not something that I had to do or that was special for me. It's something that is available to everybody. I think how somebody gets to that point, it might be different for each person. We can work to change our perception of those circumstances, even though they don't change in a way that can bring us greater peace.
Interestingly enough, I've also learned that there are going to be times when God calls us to pivot. And by pivot, I mean that we get new information or our circumstances change, or maybe we just have different insight, but we make a choice to take a different path and head in a different direction, sometimes literally.
A large part of why I have such an earnest desire to speak to other people is because I remember what it felt like to be in such significant pain that I did not want to wake up in the morning. And it doesn't necessarily mean that my life has gotten substantially easier. It simply means that I feel more well equipped to handle the difficulties.
So instead of getting stuck in my fear, I've learned to respond to difficulties by asking myself what I would do if fear were not my first thought, and then asking God for the wisdom and strength to take that step, whatever it might be. We are all going to face difficult circumstances. We are all going to encounter obstacles that might seem overwhelming. And we are all going to get news that appears to be extremely unfortunate. But I am confident that we can respond to these circumstances from a position of power versus powerlessness if we trust in God's grace and provision.
I think the most exciting thing to me about speaking to a crowd in a church setting is that I can tell the full depth and breadth of my story. It really makes me feel empowered and useful because it wasn't just me deciding to be brave or to look at my circumstances differently. It was me understanding more about God loving me and being able to see myself more fully through God's eyes. That's what helped me to turn my life around.
And I decided that I would rather try to make it to the Arctic Ocean and fail than to not try because I might fail. And then I headed north. And I have to tell you that I did discover pretty quickly that everything that people had said about the roads was indeed true. This tall, burly biker dude looked up and saw me, and he yells out, "Kathleen, you made it!" And he swooped down and picked me up and twirled me around, and he says to me, "Kathleen, you are the bravest woman I have ever met."
I've had so many men and women come up to me to tell me about the impact that my message has had on their lives. And recently, one of them started crying because she was so incredibly moved. It meant so much to her. And so to feel like I somehow gave her a sense of hope was such a relief and such a blessing, because that's truly what I'm hoping to accomplish here.
We all have a hope and a future. As we move forward in faith instead of fear, we can learn to live life more fully. I like to call this living at full throttle. So I'd like to leave you with this. As you consider the struggles you might be facing, the dreams you've never quite followed through on, or the changes that you'd like to make in your own life, what would you do if fear were not your first thought?
I would love the opportunity to share my message of faith over fear. It's my goal to be as authentic and genuine and interesting and impactful as I can possibly be.